It's up to you guys. All right, let's see if there's sound, because we went for like 20 minutes. Okay, good. There's sound on the live stream. So feel free to still ask questions or to make comments. Don't feel like just because we're live streaming it for the people who aren't here tonight that we can't talk the way we normally talk. I think we want to encourage any questions you have or any comments that you have as well. Yeah. If I knew we were doing this, I would have set up like another microphone over here so that they could hear it, but it's all good. We're making do. But this is our Sunday night group here at Glad Tidings. We've been meeting for a few weeks, and it's been a great time of having different presentations about different topics. What we sort of thought of was, we want to encourage people to expand their minds and to just become more well-rounded and to learn different things. And so obviously on a Sunday morning, that's the main place where you're going to get the Bible. And we've been going through the book of Acts, and I hope that's been interesting, and I try to make it apply to our lives or find out how it applies in our lives. But we also do here on Sunday nights different topics that are of interest to us. So John will be speaking tonight. I'll be speaking for a little bit, and Anna's going to do our Word of the Week. And so I hope that will be of interest to you. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to just put your hand up or shout it out, and we'll have a good discussion. But let's open with prayer. Father, thank you so much for the people who have come tonight and the people who will watch this. Pray, Lord, that it would be a blessing to us and beneficial in many ways. And, Lord, that it would all be in service of growing our minds and growing ourselves as people so that we can be more and more like Jesus and more bring goodness into this world. Thank you for that. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen. Okay. Well, Anna, if you would like to come up, I know this is probably a little more, out of your comfort zone than you thought it would be, but Matt, the guy who sort of runs the group or started the group, asked Anna to, what was the word again? Kitsch? We have a word of the week to try to expand our vocabulary, so there you go. We'll see how this goes.
That's okay. Okay, so can everybody hear me? Okay, so my word is kitsch, and I'm basically just going to read off what's on here. So kitsch, the definition, something that appeals to popular or lowbrow taste and is often of poor quality. A tacky or condition teetering on the brink of kitsch. An example of kitsch is a Mickey Mayo t-shirt, or even this t-shirt could be kitsch. Art, yeah, what's that? Lowbrow. I don't know. Like you're lowering your brow on it. You're putting, yeah. So it's art, decorative objects, and other forms of representation of questionable artistic or aesthetic value, a representation that is excessively sentimental, overdone, or vulgar. And another definition is you can refer to a work of art or an object of kitsch as if it is showy and thought by some people to be in bad taste. An example is a hideous ball gown verging on the kitsch. Collectors of 50s kitsch should pop over to Brussels for the flea market. Synonyms: bad taste, vulgarity, coarseness, tastelessness. Kitsch is also an adjective. Blue and green eyeshadow has long been considered kitsch. So next page. Kitsch is is a German word, and it's a term applied to art and design that is perceived as naive, imitation, gratuitous, or of banal taste. The avant-garde opposed kitsch as melodramatic and superficial affiliation with the human condition and its natural standards of beauty. In the first half of the 20th century, kitsch referred to products of pop culture that lacked the depth of fine art. However, since the emergence of pop art in the 50s, kitsch is sometimes reappreciated in knowingly ironic, humorous, or earnest fashion. The brand visual art as kitsch is often still pejorative, though not exclusively. Art deemed kitsch may be enjoyed in an entirely positive and sincere manner. For example, it carries the ability to be quaint or quirky without being offensive on the surface, as in the dogs playing poker paintings. Kitsch can refer to music, literature, or any work, and relates to camp, as they both incorporate irony and extravagance. So a little bit of history. It's a descriptive term. Kitsch originated in the art markets of Munich, Germany, in the 1860s and the 70s, describing cheap, popular, and marketable pictures and sketches. In the German book of Kitsch by Hans Riemann, defines it as a professional expression born in a painter's studio. The study of kitsch was done almost exclusively in German until the 70s, Walter Benjamin being an important scholar in the field. Kitsch is regarded as a modern phenomenon coinciding with social changes in recent centuries such as the Industrial Revolution, urbanization, mass population, modern materials, and media such as plastics, radio, and television, the rise of the middle class, and public education, all of which have factored into a perception of oversaturation of art produced for the popular taste. The concept of kitsch is a central motif in Milan Kundera's 1984 novel called The Unbearable Likeness of Being. The novel goes on to relate the definition of kitsch to politics, and specifically, given the novel setting in Prague around the time of the 1968 invasion by the Soviet Union, to communism and totalitarianism. He gives the example of communist May Day ceremony and of the sight of children running on the grass and the feeling this is supposed to provoke. This emphasis on feeling is fundamental to how kitsch operates. So kitsch causes two tears to flow in quick succession. The first tear says, "How nice to see children running on the grass." The second tear says, "How nice to be moved together with all mankind by children running on the grass." It is the second tear that makes kitsch kitsch. According to the narrator, kitsch is the aesthetic ideal of all politicians and all political parties and movements. However, where a society is dominated by a single political movement, the result is totalitarian kitsch. When I say totalitarian, what I mean is that everything that infringes on kitsch must be banished for life, every display of individualism because a deviation from the collective is a spit in the eye of the smiling brotherhood, every doubt because everyone who starts doubting details will end by doubting life itself, an irony because in the realm of kitsch, everything must be taken seriously. So Kundera's concept of totalitarian kitsch has since been invoked in the study of art and culture of regimes such as Stalin's Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, and Iraq under Saddam Hussein. Kundera's narrator ends up condemning kitsch for its true function as an ideological tool under such regimes, calling it a folding screen set up to curtain off death. So the next part is the melancholic kitsch versus nostalgic kitsch. An example of that is the souvenir snow globe with an underwater motif. In her 1999 book, The Artificial Kingdom, A Treasury of the Kitsch Experience, historian Celeste, and I can't pronounce her last name, develops a theory of kitsch that situates its emergence as a specifically 19th century phenomenon, relating it to the feelings of loss elicited by a world-transformed science and industry, focusing on examples such as paperweights, aquariums, mermaids, and the Crystal Palace. Celeste uses Benjamin's concept of the dialectical image to argue for the utopian potential of the melancholic kitsch, which she differentiates from the more commonly discussed nostalgic kitsch. These two types of kitsch correspond to two different forms of memory. Nostalgic kitsch functions through reminiscence, while sacrifices the intensity of experience for a conscious or fabricated sense of continuity. Incapable of tolerating the intensity of the movement, reminiscence selects, consolidates an event's acceptable parts into a memory perceived as complete. This reconstructed experience is frozen as an emblem of itself, becoming a cultural fossil. So in contrast, melancholic kitsch functions through remembrance, a form of memory that Celeste links to the souvenir, which I happen to like, which attempts to repossess the experience of intensity and immediacy through an object, while reminiscence translates a remembered event to the realm of symbolic, deprived of immediacy in favor of representational meaning. Remembrance is the memory of the unconscious which sacrifices the continuity of time for the intensity of the experience. Far from denying death, melancholic kitsch can only function through a recognition of its multiple deaths as a fragmentary remembrance that is subsequently commodified and reproduced. It glorifies the perishable aspect of events, seeking in their potential and decaying memory the confirmation of its own temporal dislocation. Thus, for Celeste, melancholic kitsch is able to function as a Benjaminian dialectical image, an object whose decayed state exposes and reflects its utopian possibilities, a remnant constantly reliving its own death, a ruin. And kitsch in art theory and aesthetics. Modernist writer Hermann Broch argues that the essence of kitsch is imitation. Kitsch mimics its immediate predecessor with no regard to ethics. It aims to copy the beautiful, not the good. According to Walter Benjamin, kitsch is, unlike art, a utilitarian object lacking all critical distance between object and observer. It offers instantaneous emotional gratification without intellectual effort, without the requirement of distance, without sublimation. Kitsch is less about the thing observed than about the observer. According to Roger Scruton, kitsch is fake art expressing fake emotions whose purpose is to deceive the consumer into thinking he feels something deep and serious. Thomas Kulka in Kitsch and Art starts from two basic facts: that kitsch has an undeniable mass appeal and considered by the art-educated elite bad, and then proposes three essential conditions. 1, kitsch depicts a beautiful or highly emotional charged subject. 2, the depicted subject is instantly and effortlessly identifiable. 3, kitsch does not substantially enrich our associations related to the depicted subject. And the last part is just about kitsch painting. Okay. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, is what I think. Really. Yeah. 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 We should give him the microphone.
Well, let's say, for example, you use this beautiful thing you see in a personal experience. Let's say you see your own children running in the grass and you say, oh, how beautiful that is to see. Look how joyous they are. Look how happy they are. And let's say now you try to now use that experience you had to now advertise it. Let's say, for example, you're advertising, I don't know, children's shoes or something, or advertising shirts or something from the children. Now you then try to use that beautiful experience you had, but now you try to do it through the lens of trying to market or sell or advertise, another goal that you had that doesn't derive from that original beautiful kind of experience that you had. So that's that. Yes, please. Yeah, exactly. It's devaluing it. It's trying to steer a hidden agenda through the lens of that original experience that you had. Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. That's really interesting. That's a really good question. Yeah, I like how you did that, Anna. And it's interesting because you can try to market or sell the flowers on the shirt and say, oh, look how beautiful it is, but does it actually capture that experience of, let's say, being in let's say the plains of a forest or the plain, and actually really looking and seeing and paying attention to those flowers and kind of what they say to you? Is it? And I wouldn't say it's the same thing. I would say that, as you mentioned, you're somehow now getting a caricature of that experience, and you're trying to now sell it and say, oh, look how artistic I am, or look how. But you're doing it in a way that doesn't adhere to that. I keep saying this, that original experience. There's something in that experience that is good. There's something in that experience that is beautiful. And of course, now I'm not saying that there's anything wrong with wearing a flower shirt. Like at the end of the day, like it can be playful and fun, and there's nothing inherently evil or like wrong about it. But when that kind of thing gets magnified on all the different cultural, all the different kinds of experiences that we have, whether it's children running in the grass, whether it's flowers, whether it's all the different kinds of things that we experience, and you start to then build, let's say, a world that is deviating or that's setting itself apart from how we live in the world as we truly do. Yeah. Awesome. Oh no, I'm okay. I ran out of battery.
Yeah, it's all good. Where my mind went was relationships, right? You can present the interactions people have in relationships and present it in such a way where it's cheesy, or like, you know what I mean? Like where it's not truly representing the real thing. And unfortunately, we can do this in church about our relationship with God or a relationship with one another. We can speak about faith or other things in very superficial ways, but you have to experience it yourself. You have to, try to connect with the transcendent yourself in order to really understand what it means to have faith and to be in relationship with God or engage in that, right? So I think that's interesting. I didn't quite put any of that together when Matt talked about it, or even when Anna was reading. But now that we've done that, I'm like, wow, that really fits with what we've been saying. Joanne? Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah. Right. It's how we talk about, it's good to get connected, in our case here at church, to Jesus. Get connected to Jesus and start your journey of faith. But we want to go deeper, right? We want to go a little further and understand the Bible more and understand our faith more and trying to see what that means, right? And so, yeah, there's nothing wrong with a surface level. It's just, to me, or for at least for somebody like me, it's the beginning. Yeah, Chris. Yeah. A- Yeah, and that's what you've been presenting to us, and we've been talking about of the difference between the nearness and the farness, and things that are real that you can experience as opposed to something that's on the screen or whatever, right? So, yeah, good. Well, John, did you want to come up and do your presentation? Okay, sounds good. What images did you need me to put on the screen for you? Yeah. Like, would that be okay? Or do you want me to just find them? How many are participants?
I think so, yeah. Alright, sounds good. Hopefully you can look them up like that. Okay, so today we're going to be talking about so this isn't actually a book, it's from an article from a magazine called History Today, which I think is a really great magazine actually, if you ever read it. They're very densely written articles. The magazine covers a wide variety of periods, and they're often fairly insightful. So today I'm going to be presenting on an article about Otto Dies from the History Today magazine, and the article is titled Beyond Good and Evil, How World War I Soldier Otto Dieck Became Spellbound by Nietzsche. Yeah, so Ottodix. And so basically he's an artist who served in the First World War for the German army, and his time there was a little bit enjoyable, so he did find some time to paint and reflect on his life a lot. And his two main inspirations were the war itself and, were the war itself and the philosophy of Friedrich Nietzsche. So during the war, both sides utilized a lot of religious imagery in order to call advantages to their troops, along with superstitions. So one example of this would be the superstition of the Virgin and the Child statue in Somme, Germany, where basically the statue was starting to fall over, and the opposing sides would fought basically that whoever had knocked over the statue would surely lose the war. And, well, basically, no one knocked over the statue. Okay, so when we're looking at war, it becomes obvious that religion becomes an important tool for how people cope with the tragedies of the war, and it becomes especially important and moving. So it creates a pillar of belief for people to rest their burdens on. Okay. One interesting idea too is that, even when we're looking at the statue, right? Imagine if your side knocked over the statue, right? Well, then you're going to think, oh, my side's definitely going to lose. So sort of an interesting question we can ask is it better to expect a bad outcome than to have something that is uncertain? Anyone want to chime in? Okay. Okay, so we all think uncertain. Some people would disagree. So one book that I know we talked about, I think Dan mentioned it briefly in the last section, was Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl, where I think one of the main ideas of the book is really that his time at the Viktor Frankl was a Jew, by the way, at the Nazi concentration camps, and one of the things he said was the worst part of it was not knowing when it was going to end. So maybe it is better sometimes to have that certainty that something bad is probably going to happen then. And one of the reasons for that is that we can at least prepare for it in advance. Whereas if we don't know what the outcome is, then we can't mentally prepare ourselves for what could happen. Okay, so religion is important to people coping in the war. So where does Nietzsche come in for Otto Dies? Well, basically, both sides, the Christian view and the view of Otto Dies, both believed that suffering had a transcendental value, but for the opposite reasons. Completely different reasons, basically. So, whereas the Christian view might view suffering as value because it has a redeeming quality to that. You can suffer and then experience redemption by that way, in higher order. However, Dies had viewed suffering itself as a reward, and he had actually volunteered for the army in the hopes of experiencing these extremes of life. So we're going to talk about where this came from. So I don't think the article actually has these paintings in there. So the first painting in English is just stormtroops advancing under a gas attack. And then if that's a Sturmtrooper get unter Gas vor. Yeah. So, does anyone want to talk about that? Yeah, exactly. One of the things that we kind of notice is that at the front of the picture, where say the guy right there is standing, his fingers are really curled and sort of a gnarled fashion, kind of like an animal with claws. What else do we notice? Yeah, it's dark. So, yeah, it's a very dark atmosphere. It depicts war, perhaps. Yeah, death. Yeah, and not just the dark atmosphere, but everything in the background, too, is also, kind of dying. The people in the back are becoming obscure. I guess on the right side, there's, some tree branches or something and maybe some barbed wire at the front. But everything looks like it's falling apart. Mm-hmm. Okay. Anything else? Yeah. It looks like. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So the arms are up. It looks like they're kind of initiating an attack. The one guy is holding a grenade, for example. Chris, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I was just going to add to the color of this. It's dark, but it's also color. There's a color to it. It's interesting.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering why he wanted to paint the advancing side, not the retreating side. If that makes sense. I'm wondering why he wanted to paint the ones going forward and not back.
Yeah. Right. So maybe one of the reasons, because I did mention Otto Dies is heavily influenced by Nietzsche, at least during his paintings in the First World War. One of the reasons for that could be of the beliefs behind the Übermensch as being the person who comes to take power, essentially, rather than having things happen to him. If that makes sense. What do you think of that?
So would that mean that these things that these soldiers are an Übermensch, they're because they are
right?
Is he doing this in good outlook, or is he not?
Right. Yeah. So I would say that Dies is sort of I think he's very optimistic. But one of the things that Nietzsche would say is basically at a time like this, you might not become a Superman. You might become a beast. And maybe that's kind of what's being portrayed here, is that, well, maybe instead of becoming supermen, these men have become beasts, as indicated by the claws, for example. Yeah. Okay, let's move on. Okay, so Otto's point basically was that through suffering, man can become greater than himself, and it's only through this experience of extreme suffering that man can then become the Übermensch, or the Superman. So, and this is an idea that came from the modern German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche, that basically it's the idea that man is simply a bridge to another version of man that's superior to himself. In other words, it's the full expression of a human that can basically say yes to any task they choose. And then I am kind of I guess I'll say this. Okay, I am kind of like expanding a little bit on Nietzsche philosophy by using they. He was pretty adamant about man. So, FYI, but I think it's fine to say that. As in male, yes. Yeah, he was. We won't talk about that today. Okay. Yeah. Right, yeah. So, for example, the suffering of Christ on the cross, that's valuable because of its redemption of mankind, for example. And even if, like, say you, from a sort of stoic perspective, for example, you could also say, okay, maybe suffering is valuable because by suffering, you can become more content with life, for example, when other hardships come across. Whereas Nietzsche would just, well, or at least Otto Diess' interpretation of Nietzsche is that suffering itself is a good thing, because suffering can, well, yeah, make you a greater man.
So that's why I'm mentioning this. It really means in the future you will become better.
Chris, you want to?
To reply to Joanne, like, Christians have the maxim creatio ex nihilo, which means something came from nothing. So here's the thing with suffering. It's that in the Christian outlook, in suffering, right, that is a time where we do not, where we cannot see God. But through faith, if we believe that God is with us in those instances of suffering, then we can find redemptive salvation within that suffering. That's the Christian outlook on suffering in general, if that makes sense. I totally get why it's like doesn't. Yeah, because there's. Oh, sorry. Please go on.
Yeah, I guess just to kind of summarize Chris' point, is that in the Christian view, because of the faith in God, suffering is redeemed through God. I think that's what you said, correct?
I think it's through faith.
Through faith in God?
Because if in suffering we are challenged in not seeing God present with us. So through faith, in believing that God is there, what then happens is you turn that suffering into something that is redeeming.
Okay. Yeah, so by having faith that God is there, even though he's not, you can turn that into something that's redeeming,
Yes.
basically. Yeah. Whereas in the Nietzsche point of view, there's basically no God, so you just have suffering and yourself.
It helps you become a better person.
Yeah. Well, Nietzsche. So I guess probably like the summary of why suffering is compelling for man is that when he experiences suffering, he what.
You're kind of like if you're forced if you're suffering, then you're kind of forced to tap into.
Right, right. Well, it's kind of like that, but instead of God, Nietzsche would say that you basically tap into the will.
Tap into your higher potential.
Yeah, kind of. Chris, did you want to add anything?
Oh, I just really liked your comment because that is exactly where I was coming from. That basically, like the Christian tradition has, from a creatio ex nihilo, the whole point of that maxim that something comes from nothing is basically it's in suffering we are basically tested in a sense of um, through this contact point that we have with God, if that makes sense. So when I say contact point, I mean to say we are through suffering in the Christian tradition, the worldview has. It's basically asking. Religion is basically meant to put us into contact with divinity or with God. And in suffering, that is where we are tested. Our contact point is tested. And Nietzsche would say that that contact point that we have with God, it has been corrupted. He's saying it has been corrupted by the Garden of Eden, in where Adam ate the forbidden fruit that God told him to not eat. So at that point in Christianity, what happened is that Nietzsche would say that the contact point that we had with God at that point vanished. It was out of existence. But the Christian tradition says that that contact point is still there, and it's through faith.
Okay, so
Faith is in when we're tested, and we don't have that direct access to God. Having faith and saying, creation ex nihilo, nothing comes from something, means to say that that in this something of suffering, the nothing. You mean to say the nothing or the other side of where God is still present in that something of suffering that we are experiencing.
Okay, so I guess to summarize your point is that in the Christian viewpoint, suffering, there's a contact point you can make with God, and that contact point is faith. Okay, would you say that's a good summary? Is that?
Yes, that's a good
Okay.
summary.
Yeah. So maybe that differentiates the Christian point of view. I guess one of the stipulations of thinking about if we have a corrupted contact point with God, for example, as Chris put that, what are we going to tap into when we suffer? Well.
That's a good question, because that's the whole thing that Nietzsche has with Christianity. Christianity says that we must believe that God is
Yeah.
And then Nietzsche says we can't believe that God is there because he's not there, so we have to do something else.
Right.
And that's the whole tension between the Christians versus
Mhm.
atheists.
Right. Yeah. So if we can't rely on God, what do we rely on in those situations? One of the things that Nietzsche suggests is that we embrace meaninglessness. Why? So, well, maybe I am getting ahead of myself. But, so why embrace meaninglessness? Well, basically, by the idea of embracing meaninglessness, we can, if we get rid of God, then we have to start on a new plane. We can't use the same moral systems that we used to if we don't believe in God. Okay, I'll just go forward a little bit. So one of the things, why is that? Well, basically, if God is the premise for the conclusions of morality that we have, if we get rid of the premises, then we can't agree with the conclusion. And in the opposite direction, we can't go backwards with that. So if we thought, for example, that universal morals were true in the representation in the Christian faith, we couldn't say that because we agree with the morals, therefore God exists. We'd have to agree first that God exists, then the moral principles we can agree on, or that universal morality exists. So one of the things that Nietzsche basically says, well, okay, if we give up the church and God, then we need to start anew. Now, you could interpret this as saying, for example, that, well, it means that we need to create new rationale to create universal morality or new universal moral laws. Chris?
Sorry, when you say universal morality, what do you mean by that?
I mean, rules that everyone should abide by to be moral agents. So one example would be, thou shalt not kill. That's a universal moral law. No one's allowed to kill. Does that answer the question? Okay, sweet. Okay, so one of the things, so what Nietzsche suggests basically is that if we suffer, then we can then embrace meaninglessness, and then by embracing meaninglessness, we can start to become the creators of new moral laws, rather than inheriting them from old traditions. Chris?
But wouldn't the logical implication of that mean that anything is permissible?
Right. Yeah. So, one of Nietzsche's points is that this is going to cause a lot of confusion, because, well, if we're starting again, like all over again, right? How do we even come up with these grounds? And, well, Nietzsche even sort of suggests that there aren't grounds to utilize if we discard with that. And that's kind of his warning of dispensing with God, is that there's no longer a moral foundation. And so, I kind of wanted to, I guess your presentation is going to be about a half hour, right? Okay. Chris, do you want to? Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Sure.
Yeah, just looking at the image that was there right there, I kind of got the sense that how many were they, like 5 monsters? But it
Yeah.
gave a feeling that there's much more, there are many more behind them.
Mm-hmm.
Kind of gave me the sense that, yeah, you seem trouble here right now in front of you, but there's much more behind.
Yeah. So basically, he said that in the painting we showed with the monsters, a man depicted as monster. There's many more monsters behind, even though the ones that you see here, which gives a sense of impending doom. or further impending doom. Chris, did you want to say something too?
So I guess my question would be, and I know you're not positing Nietzsche's position, but you're
Mm.
kind of like trying to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
In the same way that I am. So I'm not like grilling you on your position because I think you hold the opinion, right? But my question is like, why would I need to dispel my, I guess like the thou shallts that like we have? Why would Nietzsche want to? If
Oh.
the system's working, I guess like, why get rid of it?
Yeah, so I think just basically what Chris said is that if the universal moral systems that we have already, if they work, why would we get rid of them? So I think what Nietzsche basically is saying is that, well, when you look at, for example, his quote, "God is dead," right? What does he mean by that? Well, basically the cultural landscape of God is starting to diminish. Perhaps the idea of God is dying inevitably. People are starting to move away from it. So maybe it's not a question of like whether we should or should not, and I think Nietzsche actually believes that we shouldn't dispense with that. And then he sort of comes up with a whole set of ideas for, okay, well, if we do though, then how do we work this out? Yeah, does that answer the question? Agreeably.
That it's not as if we've chosen that God is dead, but I think he says like we've killed him without realizing it.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he sort of suggests that in his quote, do we hear the noise of the grave diggers burying God? Sort of like, are we actually paying attention to this happening? Like, as you suggest, without actually realizing it's happening. And as Nietzsche might say, inevitably. Okay, any comments so far? Okay. Yeah, so one of the more interesting confusions, perhaps, is the confusion that, well, basically Adolf Hitler made with Nietzsche's philosophy. And there's a lot of speculation about this. I mean, they wrote about it in the History Today magazine, but there's a lot of different evidence to suggest that, well, basically Hitler didn't even really study Nietzsche, and if he did, then it was probably from The Will to Power anyways, which was written by Nietzsche's sister, basically, who was the opposite of Nietzsche in many respects. So one example of that is Nietzsche hated nationalism, and he renounced his Austrian citizenship before his death, and so he died stateless because he hated nationalism. But his sister was very nationalist. Yeah. I guess one more thing that we can kind of quickly talk about, going back. You show the painting Dead in Mud. That's Toter im Schlamm. Oh, and one other thing. So after Adolf Hitler adopted Nietzsche's philosophy, Otto Diess never depicted Nietzsche in paintings ever again. So, FYI. Yeah. Okay. So, what do we think? This is also one of the World War I paintings. Chris?
I guess it tells a story, like it's a good painting in that sense. When I look at it, I wonder like what happened. Like you just have this still image, and I'm just questioning what actually happened.
Okay. Yeah, so it tells a story, but the story is sort of vague, and we're trying to piece that together. Okay. Anyone else? Yeah, it's a depressing picture. Something that's kind of noteworthy too is the title. The title "Dead in Mud" is very vulgar. It doesn't even really depict this is a man dying, and he's dead. He's covered in mud, which is interesting because even though Nietzsche would tell you that dying in battle is one of the best ways to die, this doesn't look glorifying at all. Any thoughts? Okay. Okay. Yeah. So could it just not be true that it's glorious at all? Chris, you wanted to?
Yeah, it's a really complicated issue because I know what he's trying to refer to. I think he's trying to refer to like the strength that one has in battle,
Mm-hmm.
but being faced with this uncertainty and being faced with this this confrontation with like what is it all for? Why am I doing this?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So basically, Chris's sort of answer to that would be it is a glorious death, but it's meaningless.
Oh, no. I would actually say that, so this reminds me of Socrates' death. Socrates was this ancient philosopher in ancient Greece, and he was kind of going around Athens and teaching using the Socratic method, the adults and the children he would be talking to. And the towns of Athens eventually got annoyed that he was going around like just being
Yeah.
kind of an amusement park,
Yeah.
like a walking amusement. So they then said, you got to stop talking to people and just mind your own business because you're creating like this hoopla. And they said that they first fined him, and he said, no, I'm not going to pay the fines. And they then said, if you don't pay the fines, you're going to be sentenced to death.
Mm-hmm.
And he says that he listened to his inner voice and he said, no, I'm not going to pay the fines because I'm not doing anything wrong. And he
Mhm.
follows that through right until the end of his death. And to me, what Socrates had was something that was, he latched onto something that was more important
Mm-hmm.
than his own death. And he followed through with that, and he went all the way through to the end with that. And I think that that is trying to find that thing, whether it's God or whether it's anything, like whether it's another person, like trying to find that and latch onto that, to me is worth death.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so if I'm understanding you correctly, basically like the story of Socrates, where he died for what he believed in, the soldier is kind of doing the same thing. So even though it's not glorifying, he is embracing the self-sacrifice to do what is right. Is that?
It's very special. It has to be something that one truly believes in.
Mm-hmm.
It can't just be for an empty principle that they're following. Like, meaning to say, it's like, what would be the reason to die if there's just going to be 2 more wars after the war that I'm in right now?
Mm-hmm.
That people will die. It's like, you have to find something like that's not just for surface reasons.
Yeah. So that's a good point. That it sort of has to be a kind of higher power, basically compelling you. Whether that be, that could be an ideology. This. I always talk about Harari's book. Harari has a nice book called *Sapiens*. He talks about a lot of different ideas. One of his chapters is on imagination and how different ideas can basically unify people together to work as a collective. Yeah, but like other than that, yeah, I think that was pretty much spot on. Like basically what Nietzsche called dying in battle is the sacrifice of a great soul. Yeah. So right on. Okay. Any more comments, questions?
So what sort of drew you to wanting to speak about this? Like in other words, like what's the underlying point of making this contrast? Is it the reality of the fact that God is a concept that a lot of people don't believe it anymore, or and therefore we have to confront the reality of what that is right and wrong?
Yeah. So that's a big point. One of the that basically, going forward, younger generations in particular, are becoming a lot more atheistic. I think, anyways, might be wrong, but
That's what we assume.
yeah. But definitely compared to say like 100 years ago, way less. So yeah, we do have to confront the ever-changing moral landscape and how moving on from religion will impact that. Yeah, does that?
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, cool.
It actually dovetails with my presentation.
Oh, awesome.
So if you don't mind, I think that's a great transition.
Yeah, sure.
Okay. Thank you, John.
Thanks.
We actually have two words to talk about this week, because we're going to look at a word. Here, let's just grab that. Yeah. All right. Thanks, John. Okay, so yeah, we looked at kitsch earlier, and now I'm going to give you a word that will make you feel something, I would think. And it's great that John spoke about what he spoke about, because from this perspective that I'm going to present to you, I think makes perfect sense from a Christian worldview. And in fact, it might be even easier to embrace from a Christian worldview. And I have a whole booklet. Oh, did you just hear that? It's even better now. It's a little off. I have a whole booklet about. We need to do a whole overhaul of our sound system, I think. It's a little better. Okay. Anyway, from an atheist or secular perspective, I think it's still something that can be embraced, and I hope to show you. Obviously, I'm going to have to speed through this, but at the same time, I want us to really be thinking about what all this means, and please ask questions if you don't, if you don't know what I'm talking about, or if you want to challenge what I'm talking about. So my presentation is called. Let's see. There we go. My presentation. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Check 1 2. Okay, hopefully that stays like that. What do you feel, or what do you think of when you see the word anarchy? Chris? Chaos? Yeah. Anyone else? Is that what comes to mind? Chaos? It's not logical. Yeah, that seems like a contradictory sort of title, right? Statement. Well, the actual first definition that comes up when you Google it is a state of disorder due to absence or non-recognition of authority. So not recognizing authority, and that leads to disorder and to chaos. So yeah, that is the first thing that people think of, and it's the first definition in the dictionary. However, the etymology of the word anarchy reveals that it has nothing to do with this. It actually means, literally, here I am pressing down on my computer when it's this one. Literally means without rulers. It comes from the Greek word that means without ruler. See that there? The an is without in Greek, and the archos or archon in Greek is means ruler or rulers. So it literally means without rulers. And it refers to apparently to a time when there was a certain region and there were no state rulers and this word developed. However, in modern day, when I'm using the word anarchy or anarchism, I'm talking about this definition, which is thankfully the second definition when you look it up on Google. It says the absence of government and an absolute freedom of the individual regarded as a political ideal. So I think in this sense, anarchy is not only moral, it's logical, and I'm going to show you why. So, what does anarchy mean again? It literally means without rulers. Now, let me be very clear. Anarchism is not without rules. See the difference? You can have no rules, and that would result in chaos. But that's not what this word means, and that's not what I'm referring to when I talk about and advocate for anarchism. And this all came from wanting to speak about it tonight, and I'm sad he's not here. Hopefully he'll watch it on the live stream. Because Matt brought up capitalism versus socialism a couple weeks ago, and my mind can't think in those terms because I understand this. And so hopefully you'll see what I mean. But we have to talk about basic moral rules. And this is why I said it's not without rules, it's without rulers. So we have to think about basic moral rules and understand, and this might be a little strange if you've never heard this before, we have to understand everything in the world to be property, even each of us. We need to think of ourselves as property. And do you know why I would propose that? Why should we be thinking of ourselves as property? What do we do with property? We own it, right? Okay, so think about this. Property is defined as a thing or things belonging to someone, right? Well, who owns you? Have you ever thought about that? And I don't mean in the modern, millennial sense or however people say it, like, oh, that guy got owned. I mean, who owns you, right? Let's see here. What do I have? I have the word property is referring to a thing or things belonging to someone. And there's an author named Murray Rothbard, which I based a lot of this on. He said the key to a theory of liberty, or in what I'm saying as the logic of anarchy, is the establishment of the rights of private property. For each individual's justified sphere of free action can only be set forth if his rights of property are analyzed and established. You can only talk about freedom if you can, and what that means, if you establish what property is and who owns what. So crime is sort of the other side of it, can then only be defined and properly analyzed as a violent invasion or aggression against the just property of another, including the person themselves. So we have to classify everything as property, even people, because if we don't do that, then it actually becomes incoherent to talk about basic moral rules. You brought up thou shalt not murder, right? Thou shalt not murder. So let's talk about the basic moral rules just very quickly. You shouldn't murder, right? You shouldn't assault people. You shouldn't enslave people. You shouldn't steal from people. None of these make sense if you don't understand that each person owns themselves. I'm sort of jumping ahead. Let me tell you about this. Scarcity. Economists recognize that, and tell me if you think this is right or not, that human desires are unlimited, but resources in the world are limited. So my potential of what I could do with this laptop is unlimited, right, in a sense. But there's only one laptop. And you all could do something with this laptop, but there's only one of them. And unfortunately, only one person can use it at a time. The very fact that it's limited in that scope means that if you all want to use this laptop at the same time I'm using it, well, then there's going to be a conflict, right? And so that's what scarcity brings to the forefront. It makes it so that there are conflicts. Let me read what Ludwig von Mises said. He's an Austrian economist. He said, the available supply of every commodity is limited. So he's just saying every available supply of anything is limited. If it were not scarce with regard to the demand of the public, the thing in question would not be considered an economic good, and no price would be paid for it. I'll give you an example of what he's saying. Everybody taking a breath? Okay, you each owe me $10 for doing that because I own this air. How ridiculous would that be, right? You can't own the air. It's everywhere. Like, even if I was, like, you know, deranged enough to charge for breathing in this air, what would you do? See you later. Chris? In our context, in this environment, literally this environment, it's not scarce. So it's not limited. We all can breathe the same air at the same time. And your breathing in this air doesn't affect my ability to breathe this air. At the point at which it does become something where it interferes in other people's ability to breathe in the air, that's when it becomes scarce and conflict arises. So that's the point that's being made here is well, in fact, somebody named Stephen Kinsella said this, a little reflection will show that it's the fact that goods can be scarcity is the fact, let me say it again. The fact that there can be conflict over these goods by multiple human actors is due to scarcity. The very possibility of conflict over a resource renders it scarce, giving rise to the need for ethical rules to govern its use. Thus, the fundamental social and ethical function of property rights is to prevent interpersonal conflict over scarce resources. Again, there is no conflict in this room right now as it relates to air because it's everywhere in the room and we can all breathe it at the same time and there's no conflict. But if you wanted to use my laptop while I'm wanting to use it, sorry, I'm going to claim ownership over this laptop. And there's a reason why I can claim ownership over it. Let me go even deeper, and this is getting at the heart of it. If you try to get me to do something that I don't want to do, what is that called? Trying to get some, say again? Enslavement. Why though? Because, like, why can't you demand that I do things? You don't own me, and I don't own you. Who owns me? Me. Now, okay, this is why at the very beginning I said from a Christian perspective, obviously we're going to see ourselves as a creation of God, right? And he has given us dominion over our own selves, right? But even from an atheistic perspective, you can say, well, there's nothing different about you as a human being that makes you different than me, that would give you better ownership over me. My mind is what's controlling my body. So I have the best claim over my body, not you. Chris?
I was going to ask, you were talking last week about sovereign citizens.
Yeah.
You don't think that
Yeah. Right. They have perhaps philosophically not much. If that could be what they're at. But I think people who want to go out and challenge the state by themselves like that are kind of dumb, you know. Right. Yes, exactly. So this is the you know, basically the conclusion is the state does not own me because no one owns me but myself. And I alone have the ability to choose what happens to my body and so on and so forth. And that then opens up a whole, you know, what does that mean? But I want to establish some of these points, right? So self-ownership, who owns you? Does that make sense? That you own you? Like nobody else has a better claim to you than you. Because your mind is controlling your body. If I try to control you, I have to do it through your mind. See the difference there? You have primary control over your body. I, at best, could have secondary control over your body. You know what I mean? Does that make sense, Chris?
I'm just trying to think about what would you mean by own? So, for example,
Yeah.
to use in terms of to think with math here.
Yeah.
I have to work at a job that I, to be honest with you, wouldn't want to work at otherwise.
Right.
In order to
Yes.
for stable income.
Right.
How much do I owe myself in that situation? Of course, we can get so deep into it because
Yeah.
the corporation will tell you the rules, do's and don'ts on the job. Don't do this, but then you can sometimes go against that. So that's like the microcosm, like you do within the job, then go on a bigger level, like how much do I owe myself if the state can send me to war?
Right.
Right?
That's a big question. Exactly. So to sort of get the philosophy here, you sort of have to imagine a world where nobody owns ownership over anything hasn't yet been established. And so we're just starting from the very most primary thing, which is yourself. You start there, right? But what that means is you have, like, in order to live, you have to eat, you have to drink, you have to have shelter, so on and so forth. Nobody, if nobody owns you, then the sort of the other side to that is then nobody is obligated to keep you alive. Or to put it even a different way, you have the responsibility to take care of yourself, right? But guess what? I don't know anything about going out into the world and planting food and like if I had to go out into the woods and try to survive, I'd be dead in a week. Like just and if you sent me to war, I'd be dead the first day. You know what I mean? Like that's just not me. I'm a product of living in this culture and life. So what would I do? I would have to negotiate with other people in order to survive. I would seek out other people's services and other people's products, and I would try to offer something in return. In my case, it's offering the product of my labor, right? My services that I can provide, in this case, as a pastor, and so on. So, look at what John Locke said about owning yourself. Every man has a property in his own person. This nobody has any right to but himself. The labor of his body, so then he's going to extend that. Because if you own yourself, then what happens? Wow, there you go. Then what happens if you own yourself, what happens when you take your labor and you mix it with the natural world? Let's say you go out and you cultivate the ground, right? That then becomes the product of your labor. So that now becomes your property, right? And we're assuming that is unowned, like it's just a piece of land that's never been touched before, right? That's yours because you've mixed yourself with it. So he says, whatsoever then he removes out of the state of that nature hath provided and left it in. He hath mixed his labor with and joined to it something that is his own, and thereby makes it his property. So from this perspective, again, it's sort of like you're building it up. You own yourself, and you have therefore the right to say what should or shouldn't happen to you. Like nobody can decide for you. If they do, then they're doing so immorally. They're doing so with the use of aggression. If you then start there and you say, okay, let's extend that. If I take me and I mix myself, my labor, with the world, then I can start having property. I can start having things that belong to me. But what if we live in the world that we live in where things are already owned? Well, then it comes to the level of negotiation. You can say, I'm willing to trade you this for that. I'm willing to trade you my time and labor or expertise for money or for a product or for a service. That is the only reasonable and moral way to obtain more property, is to negotiate with other people and to come to, what's the word I'm looking for? Come to conclusions, come to agreements, contracts, right? So let's look at the idea of rights. What is a right? Well, in this context at least, we're referring to what each individual can morally claim to own, free from the aggression of others. And if an individual's rights can only derive from his self-ownership, and I would say not be dependent upon some external factor. So what are we talking about? We're talking about the right to life, the right to freedom or liberty, and the right to own property. These are rights, not because they exist somewhere in the world. You can't go out into the world in nature and find these rights. These are concepts that we have developed based upon very basic moral rules. So I'll ask these questions. If someone murders you, what have they taken away from you without your consent? Your life, but think of it a little in a different way. Chris? Okay. And when would you use that free will or that life? In the future. So think about that. If a person murders you, they have taken away from you without your consent your future, right? You now no longer live and exist to continue to live and do what you want. If someone assaults you, what have they taken away from you without your consent? Your safety, your well-being, your present condition in those states. Nobody, like by definition, I hope you catch this, by definition, you do not consent to be murdered. It's embedded in the word, because we have a different word, which can be a little confusing. Thou shalt not kill. Well, that's confusing, because kill is not the same as murder. Because you could give somebody your consent. You could go out, voluntarily go off to war and be killed. And in a sense, that's not wrong because you've voluntarily done that. That's maybe not the best example, but the point being is embedded in the word murder is you don't want to be killed and somebody's doing it anyway, right? Embedded in the word assault is you would prefer not to be hit and somebody does it anyway, right? What about this one? If somebody enslaves you, what have they taken away from you without your consent? It's kind of the same thing, right? Your present condition, your desire to want to do what you want to do with your life, your liberty, your freedom, your autonomy, right? Lastly, if someone steals from you, what have they taken away from you without your consent? Yeah, your property. And so in this context, in this sort of way we're thinking of it, what then is your property? What is, like, I've paid for this, thank God. It took me a few months of payments, but I paid for it a couple years ago. But where did I get that money to pay for this? Well, I put in a ton of time and labor here at my job as a pastor to make money and to buy this product, right? It's my past. This is a representation of my past labor and time and energy, right? It's all embedded in this thing here. So if somebody tries to take this without my consent, they've just taken a piece of me. All that time and energy and money that I put into this, and all of the things I use it for, are gone without my consent, and they violated me. And I think that that's what we want to look at. When people coerce others to do things against their will, they're really violating you on a very, what would you say, like a very deep level. Like if somebody steals from you, they're taking all of the things that you've done. If somebody enslaves you, they're preventing you from living your life the way you want to. If somebody murders you, now you have no future, right? This is the what's the word I'm looking for? Like the tragedy of when people do these things. They're violating the person who is the victim. So wouldn't it make way more sense if we had the kind of society where everybody respected each individual's right to have life, liberty, and property? Wouldn't that make way more sense? Wouldn't that be literally the only moral kind of society? What kind of society do you think we could then have if everybody respected each other's rights in this way? Or to put it differently, if we had the kind of society where nobody was stopping us from living our lives the way we want to, and nobody was taking our property without our consent, what would we have? Peace. There you go. Peace, and I think prosperity. Because every interaction that you would then have would be voluntary. And why would, I try to encourage people, stay in relationships that are beneficial to you, that you bring benefit to them and they bring benefit to you. Those are the best kinds of relationships. The worst kind of relationships is a lose-lose, right? Where people are just taking advantage of you or bringing you down, and you're not really even bringing anything to them because there's no love there to build upon, right? But you don't even have to love somebody to have a beneficial relationship. I don't love the guy at the corner store, right? But I'm nice to him, and I say thank you at the end of my interaction because I've given them some money, which is something that they want, and I take the thing that I'm buying from them, which is something that I want, and we both say thank you, have a good day. Beneficial. Chris?
Yeah, I'm curious on how this relates to Christian tradition, Christian worldview, specifically with agape love.
Yeah.
Because I'm in terms of treating the relationships I have as transactional.
Yes. Yeah.
Like a down to business kind of way.
Right.
Where like actually appreciating and showing love for something that you've been highlighting in this lecture, which is like the value of the human being.
Yeah.
Christian worldview seems to understand.
Yeah, yeah. So some of the things that Matt has been talking about the past couple weeks has been, what if we could have a society where people really gave and really cared about one another and really just, when people are in need, they gave to those situations and met those needs. Well, what was in the back of my head the whole time is, and I think I even mentioned it last week, is you can have that kind of society on the foundation of this kind of society. So this kind of society is basic to how can we even have the kind of society that we would want as Christians? Well, you have to have people who aren't murdering each other, aren't assaulting each other, aren't stealing from one another, and use that as the basic foundation of a society. And then from there, you can take the resources that you have and that you own and give them and voluntarily give them away to others. So this allows for, and isn't it weird? An anarchic society is actually the foundation for a Christian society. Isn't that weird to think about it in those terms? But it's true, because we're simply saying that we don't have some ruler, we don't have the Roman emperor, for example, telling us what to do, because he's not our God, right? Nero is not our God, for example. Our God is God, and our king is Jesus, right? So as long as we adhere, like if we're Christians and our king is Jesus and we are devoted to God, we live in a society where we can get along with one another, and interestingly enough, we can actually be, let me put it this way, an anarchic society that I'm proposing here can actually have all kinds of different groups. Because if everybody agrees to disagree and allows each other to live their lives and not to interfere with each other's lives, we can get along, right? And so I think there might be some skepticism because I'm describing an ideal, I'm describing a utopian sort of atmosphere or environment, but you have to start with the philosophical underpinnings, right? You have to have the foundation of what is right and wrong, and then go from there, right? So obviously we can spend a whole nother session talking about what, in this kind of society, how would you deal with people who don't want to respect your rights? Do we have prisons? Do we have police? Do we have armies? What do we do? It's a whole other topic. Or it's not another topic, but it's more. Now, yeah, we could talk about another time for sure. But tell me what you think. Is there a logic to what I just described? And obviously, it's not perfect logic because I'm doing my best to present in 25 minutes something that can fill volumes, right? But is there a logic to this? Do we accept that there are such things as basic moral rules?
What you're describing is what Jesus taught. To love your neighbor as yourself.
Right. Yeah.
The angel said, "Bring peace on earth to men of good will."
Mm.
And that he came so that we can have life abundant.
Right.
So all that fits together.
Yeah.
But as you said, it depends on everybody agreeing
Right.
to do this.
Right.
And Jesus came to show us how we can each
Right.
do that,
Right.
or move towards that. But this kingdom, that's future, is the transition time.
Right.
He is going to be the king. He will be the ruler.
Right.
But he is a ruler that was died for.
Yes.
Believe it.
Yeah.
What Chris was saying, something greater than himself to die for.
Right.
So
Yeah. The kingdom of God, for it to be the kingdom of God and not the kingdom of this world, has to have a whole different way of working. Because if it's just like the way we do things now or the way that people have done things in the past, what do we need the kingdom of God for? It's different because it's going to be based upon, again, a respect for individuals as people, as God's creation, right? So I don't know. To me, I think that this makes sense. It allows for, again, a society that is diverse, but also one that isn't, like, it's interesting. And we'll wrap up. I know we have to wrap up, but we tell kids, I have 2 little boys, and we're trying to teach them don't hit, right? You know, Timothy in particular, he has autism, so he finds it very hard to control his emotions, but we're teaching him, and he's learning to, when he wants to lash out at his brother, that he controls himself. Like, why? Why not? Just go ahead, hit your brother, who cares? No, that's not right. We want to have a family that doesn't hit each other, and that's why we don't hit them as parents. We don't hit our kids, because we're trying to teach them we don't hit each other. You have to be consistent about that, right? We teach our kids in kindergarten, that age, right? Don't hit, don't steal your neighbor's toys, and so on and so forth. Like, either we're lying to our kids and we're just trying to control them, or those really are good moral rules and we should be living them out in society, right? So, any other thoughts before we wrap up? Yeah, Nicola.
I was thinking,
Yeah.
Acts and it wasn't the whole society, but part of the early church did abide by this principle.
That's right.
Serving each other, taking care of the widows,
Yeah.
serving each other.
Yeah. That's right. No, that's right. That's exactly what Matt, I wish he was here tonight to sort of elaborate on it, because that's what he was advocating for is exactly what happened at the early chapters of the book of Acts. And we looked at it at church a few weeks ago because we've been going through the book of Acts. anybody who was in need, they could meet those needs because they were pooling their resources together. And historically, that's what Christians have done. Charitable hospitals, even to this day, in the States at least, I'm not aware of any in Canada, although there probably are some. There are charitable hospitals where you don't have to pay for anything. You just go in and you get taken care of. And it's funded by people, voluntarily, I think it's St. Jude's. You see the commercials on American TV. I'm not sure where that is, but it's a charitable hospital. And that is not a new thing. Or there were these friendly societies back in the day. There was basically like insurance companies, but run by Christians that you could pay into. And if you had some kind of disaster, well, then you could cash in your insurance. But it was all voluntary. Nobody was forcing you to do it. You know what I mean? So that's the kind of society I want to live in. And that's why, again, we start with your own family. It's kind of what I talked about today. You start with your own sphere of influence. I can't go to Ottawa, change the government, right? Nor would I really want to. It's not really my thing, right? But I can influence my family. I can influence my church family, right? And that's where you start with these moral rules and the foundation of a good, peaceful society. And then hopefully one day, as we'll see with the kingdom of God, it'll take over the whole world, but it has to start somewhere. All right. Anyone else? Okay. Well, thank you for coming tonight. We'll close in prayer. Father, thank you for the discussions we've had tonight. So many things to think about, and pray, God, that you would help us to further think about these things, and we'll have more presentations in the future, Lord, to continue to work these things out in our minds. But God, we were grateful that you're with us and that you want us to grow. We thank you for that in Jesus' name. Amen. Safe travels back home. Thank you, and thank you for coming, and we'll see you again next time.